Temple of Mystery. Now, if you haven't got this deck so far on camera, it is different than your Blue Devotion decks in the past season, mainly because the early drop creatures don't give you the same kind of aggressive plan.
Judge's Familiar, Cloudpin Raptor, Frostburn Weird, Tiebinder Mage, they're higher in quality, and they are also a little bit more conducive to aggressive starts. That's why you see Nick's sideboard plan almost across the board has become more defensive, because his deck is not that great at applying early pressure.
Well, it's going to be a turn 2 play from him. It's going to be a copy of Frostwalker. Frostwalker, very aggressive if unanswered. Now, pretty awkward if Chris has something like Satyr Wayfinder.
But if his play is Caryatid instead, this is very high upside play, so high risk, high reward.
Well, even better than that, it's going to be a tap land, so there's going to be some damage. Thoughtseize does come out of Chris, though, and just in the nick of time, you do see that turn 3 Thassa hiding out in Peternell's hand. Can't imagine he'll give him that. Additional cards, he has 2 copies of Stratus Dancer, along with 2 more lands.
I feel like this has got to be Thassa here. I mean, maybe there's 1 copy of Stratus Dancer.
Well, Thassa's just so much better than all the other cards in Nick's deck.
I know when you get it right down to it, it's this deck is about Thassa and or Master Waves, and everything else is kind of window dressing.
All right, so there's a Thoughtseize, but Chris can take a lot of damage. 2 off the Thoughtseize is going to be 4 off the Frostwalker. Goes down to 14. He's going to have to rebuild. Now, thankfully for Chris, he does have a copy of Whip of Erebos in his hand. So if he can survive to some of those turns, he will get to start attacking and life gaining his way back up later on. You see, for Nick, he could have morphed Stratus Dancer, but he's going to go much more aggressive. Face up Stratus Dancer and a tap land.
Yeah, he's going to try to put Chris to the test here. And if Chris plays something on the ground to block, well, he can still attack in the air.
Yeah, something I actually really like here is you see Chris playing Satyr Wayfinder, card that would be great against Frostwalker. Nick, his draw for the turn was a copy of Silumgar Sorcerer, so he's able to get in with Frostwalker, and now it's still a relevant card. It's something he can sacrifice to the Silumgar Sorcerer.
And most of Chris's path to stabilizing the game involve casting creatures. He's a pretty spell-light deck at the end of the day.
Yeah, Chris, I mean, yeah, usually it's upwards of 20 creatures in the Sultai Reanimator deck. So you see Satyr Wayfinder finding a land here. Chris will play a 3rd tap land. Say go. This 1/1 figures, I imagine Chris expects him to blank the Frostwalker, but good for Nick that he'll still get value. Here's a swing for 2. Chris Morris Lent down to 12. It should be suspicious, however, that Nick didn't play a creature there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Chris would be anticipating either Stratus Dancer face up or Stratus Dancer face down, you would imagine.
Yeah, neither of those happening has got to put Chris on alert.
Yep.
Let's see what he wants to do here. 2 more mana will be a Sylvan Caryatid. I like how Chris not going to play into the counter magic here. You know, he could have just slammed Sidisi, would have been a really tide-turning play, but instead just developing mana, making Nick really waste his turns.
And I think Nick is happy to say, okay, that resolves. I don't care if you really clog up the ground very much, because at this point my plan is to attack you with flyers and try to prevent you from getting a significant creature into play.
Now it looks like what will be the decision on Peternell's side is he's drawn a 2nd copy of Silumgar Sorcerer as to whether or not he wants to put 1 of them in play to increase his air attack, or whether he just wants all the counter spells.
And with his hand clogged up with another Stratus Dancer, I think he's just got to cast this right now.
And here's the first Silumgar Sorcerer.
Especially with Chris representing the ability to cast Murderous Cut as well, I think that Nick can't really risk Chris going like, okay, untap, kill your Stratus Dancer, now you have no pressure.
If you're Chris, do you assume this means Nick has a 2nd Sorcerer?
No, not necessarily, because so far the play still makes sense one way or the other.
Here's a swing for 4, and a Murderous Cut to take care of the Sorcerer. Chris will take 2.
Because Nick could have set that turn up to say, all right, well, I'm going to play this regardless, either counter a creature or not.
Shore Crasher Elemental, the draw for Peternell. And he'll just go ahead and make that. That takes the shields down for a turn. It will pressure Chris to play a ground creature, though.
I believe that Chris does have Sidisi, which is a pretty good response to this card.
Chris treading water, however, Sidisi, you're absolutely right, is the play. Milling 3, mills another copy of Sidisi, so here's a zombie. In case it's poor, you don't really expect the ground pounders out of Peternell's deck to ever get in for damage in this matchup. Maybe on the first 2 turns, but their lifespan's very short.
Yeah, Nick getting to connect once with Frostwalker is just a huge boon.
Damage there has been a hit off Frostwalker, 2 hits off Stratus Dancer, and a Thoughtseize. That's put Chris down to 10. This whip, but the Chris had an opportunity to resolve Sidisi, and that seems so pivotal because now the Whip of Erebos in his hand will just gain tons of life. And it doesn't matter whether or not.
Well, Nick, I believe, may have drawn Master of Waves.
Well, that changes things, yeah.
He can just play Master and attack with everything. Gets in with his flyer if he wants to, and can whittle down some of Chris's board that, you know, if Chris wants to play Whip of Erebos, it's his whole turn and he doesn't have a lot to fire back with. What you want to avoid if you're a Nick side is Chris being able to play Whip and attack for a lot in the same turn.
Now, what I like, so he's in the swing Shortcrasher and Stratus Dancer. I almost thought he'd play Master Waves first because if he pumps Shortcrasher up to a 4/4, he could at least get the Sidisi out of the way. Yeah, it goes both ways. Remember, the Elemental is an Elemental, so Master Waves does pump it.
A lot of synergies here.
Yeah.
Good with Master of Waves, because it's 3 Devotion. Good with Thassa.
Yeah, I mean,
just interlocks with all the pieces.
I do like that after we lost so many of these all-blue cards out of the format, that we did get printed a card that really is designed to be played with Master Waves. It's an Elemental. It has 3 blue mana symbols. It's great synergy.
It wouldn't surprise me if R&D printed this card saying, you know, it's just a random Megamorph design. It totally makes sense in the file. And if this happens to improve Blue Devotion a little bit, make the deck a fringe contender, well, that's great.
Here's a swing. We'll see the block that Chris wants to make.
And if Chris is really leaning on Whip of Erebos, then giving up the Sidisi is a big cost because it takes a lot of the wind out of the sails of Sidisi, Whip the turn it shows up.
So he offers the trade. Nick, he'll go ahead and accept. 2 damage in puts Chris Morris Lent down to 8. Nick will pass, leaving up that Silumgar Sorcerer again. Stratus Dancer, Master Waves, Silumgar Sorcerer. That's Nick's hand. That's it, though. Whip of Erebos not too bad here. I mean, Chris still has 2 power left in play. That's what it'll do. Make the Whip of Erebos. See if he offers if he's going to swing the zombie. He will. And now Nick can deny lifelink for a turn if he wants. He could just exploit away his Frostwalker to do nothing.
I still think the Frostwalker has enough value if you assume Chris's play next turn is to whip back Sidisi, that it's not worth tendering the block right now. You would have to be attacking for lethal, I think, to justify this play.
It's really interesting. Chris has done a great job of not providing a quality target ever for the Silumgar Sorcerer in Nick's hand.
I think Nick can say, all right, I'll take this hit, end of turn, play the Silumgar Sorcerer, untap Master Waves, really puts you to test to have a removal spell.
Yep, so Chris back up to 10 off the lifelink. Draw here from Nick. It is an untapped land. It's land 5. That's going to be a good one. Going to play Master of Waves, Devotion of 3. And here's me the swing. And yeah, so more synergy in case you're wondering. Yes, Frostwalker, also an elemental. Now a 5/2, it's going to eat the Satyr Wayfinder. Not trade with it. It'll swing across. Chris will gain a life there, but takes 2, goes down to 9.
So many small synergies. They just all add up.
So many elementals.
So Frostwalker got to hit once and got to get chump blocked down the road.
Such plays. All right, we're back over to Chris Morris Land. He has 5 lands in play. If he had a 6th land, he'd have Den Protector, bring back Den Protector, cut down Master of Waves. But as it is, stands, he's a turn off that. Did not hit land 6. Gonna go to 8 off a fetch land. May just have to whip something back instead.
And Nick, if he draws a land next turn, gets pretty good at locking out multiple of Chris's angles of attack because he can play Stratus Dancer face down. That locks out instants and sorceries. He still has Silumgar Sorcerer at the ready. That locks out creatures. And it's hard for Chris to really go on the offensive here because this turn Nick's got to lap back on defense all those expendable elemental tokens.
So fetching down to 8. We'll see where Chris wants to go. It's going to be a face-down morph. Or rather, no. It looks like a face-up Den Protector. Shouldn't do it all at once. Cast Den Protector and flip it. Get back Murderous Cut. Oh, he has the carry added, so he can still cut down Master Waves this turn. And definitely needs to do that now. He knows that Nick Peternell has another copy of Stratus Dancer in hand. So it was really now or never. Chris can be able then to swing with a zombie again to gain some life.
This is a pretty good setup here for Chris, but keep in mind he doesn't have a lot going on in the graveyard just yet.
Opts not to swing the zombie.
He needs some pretty fortuitous hits with this Sidisi if he gets on the rebuy, because his graveyard is not fully stocked right now.
Yeah, I do still like how he's blanked the Silumgar Sorcerer for nearly the entire game.
Yep. It feels like every turn he's had mana up, that Nick's had mana up, Chris has cast something else that's been productive, and when Nick has put the shields down on his mana, then Chris starts rocking with some creatures.
A swing from Stratus Dancer will put Chris down to 6. Nick's remaining hand, a land, a Stratus Dancer, a Silumgar Sorcerer.
There was an opportunity there for Nick to deploy the Silumgar Sorcerer earlier the turn that he was going to cast Master of Waves, and I don't know if the extra points of damage would have mattered, but the Silumgar Sorcerer is still struggling to do much of anything in terms of countering creatures, and now Chris, with Whip of Erebos plus the DC, can go and do productive things that don't involve casting something out of his hand.
Well, I think the one turn where Nick may have fallen somewhat behind was he cast a Shore Crasher Elemental, and when he tapped out, it allowed Chris to resolve a Sidisi. And that was a lot of pressure. They ended up just trading. But more importantly, it got the Sidisi in the yard. So now once Chris played Whip, he can start whipping it back. So Whip of Erebos will get back Sidisi. It makes another zombie, and here comes a huge attack and a huge amount of life gain. And with such a tempo draw here from Nick, it's going to be hard-pressed of him to get enough damage across anymore.
Yeah, just 2/2s in conjunction with Whip of Erebos is going to be pretty challenging for Nick to overcome.
And you see Frostwalker trading away with Den Protector, but a full 9 life, or sorry, 8 life getting gained by Chris. That'll put him up to 14.
And at this point, it feels like Nick is drawing to Thassa. That's the big draw here.
Yeah, Thassa would be great. Thassa can, and you see Chris not wanting to play anything into Stratus Dancer or into Silumgar Sorcerer yet again. Draw, Master of Waves.
It shields down for Nick on, on a couple of fronts there. Can no longer counter a creature spell, but I just don't think he has the time at this point to not cast stuff.
Yeah, I think he's looking at flipping up his Stratus Dancer and just casting Master Waves, getting some elementals, and hoping for the best. But so much lifelink on Chris's side, even with all those creatures, you just can't race this onboard Whip of Erebos.
Yeah, Nick has no way to get the whip off the table. He has no way to get the 2/2s off the table.
And you see he's going to swing a Stratus Dancer, cast Master of Waves, and decides he still needs the Stratus Dancer activation, not going to want to cash it in for 1 elemental. He'll pass Chris down to 12.
Now, if Chris cannot kill the Master of Waves, at least it does a good amount of work removing the zombies from the table, because Chris has been swinging those pretty freely.
Yeah, he's been swinging with them freely. It'll trade with the zombies, but Chris will gain a lot of life. He has more Sidisis to whip back. It buys Nick time, but the question is whether or not it will get him anywhere.
Yeah, at this point, Nick's clock is so slow relative to Chris's ability to gain life.
We go back to Chris Morris Lent. Great plays on the board in these Whip of Erebos activations. And that's not to mention that he's been drawing cards every turn. So he's accrued a lot of other options as well. Cards like Death Mist Raptor, Sidisi Undead Vizier, Courser of Krufix, those have all made the way into his hand.
The problem is that most of Chris's options to cast out of his hand are his whole turn and not that effective, and it gives up a Whip of Erebos activation.
And look at Chris, how he's been playing around Silumgar Sorcerer the entire game. Finally he's dropped a creature on the board only twice. Once he played Sidisi Brood Tyrant, and this turn when he played Sidisi Undead Vizier, and they're the only 2 turns Nick has not had 3 mana up.
Yep. So I believe it looks like Chris just went ahead and got Murderous Cut.
Looks great, 1 mana up. Now he suspects that this is a Stratus Dancer on Nick's side, so maybe he doesn't have that much confidence that it will resolve, but it still forces the issue.
Well, if Chris is not confident that that cut is going to resolve, then I would have just much preferred to go get something out of the graveyard with Whip of Erebos rather than bother with a Sidisi.
We'll see what he did get. Swings 3 zombies. There's just so much life gain here. Both the elementals block. They trade away with zombies, but Chris gaining 6 goes up to 18. And he'll pass.
So I think Chris's perspective at this point is just his board's so commanding that eventually the Stratus Dancer is just going to have to block something or just get engaged in something else, have to counter something else, and it's just good to have Murderous Cut as insurance policy.
Yeah. Chris has been putting a big premium on life gain. All his plays has been about trying to get a lot of life off that Whip of Erebos. Doesn't see a lot of damage coming from Nick, and if he can gain life as fast as Nick can deal damage, Chris should eventually win. You see him not committing at all to being aggressive.
Yep. Whip of Erebos just gives him so much powerful inevitability here that Chris can just bide his time.
And it will be Stratus Dancer from Peternell, putting Chris down to 16. So much life gain. He looks like he's going to gain 6 more than on the following turn. And a full grip, a commanding board, a whip in play. Everything is going Chris Morris Lent's way. CDC on Brood Tyrant whipped back from the yard. It mills 3 cards, hits a creature. Here's another zombie. Here's the pair of Sidisi's and the zombie all attacking. It's 9 more power. Chris looks to go to 25 here. Mills another Sidisi, gets another zombie.
Yeah, this steady stream of 2/2s here, backed up by lifelink. At this stage, Nick doesn't really have a recourse to this. And Sidisi was one of the cards I was most worried about in the matchup from Nick's perspective.
Undead Vizier?
He just doesn't kill Sidisi a Brood Tyrant.
The Brood Tyrant.
He just doesn't kill this very effectively in a steady stream of 2/2s. I mean, his deck is casting those kind of cards out of its hand, you know?
Yeah, and it was really well played from Chris. Just how he timed the Sidisi from his hand. Like you mentioned, it was one of the few creatures he ever cast, but it set up his Whip of Erebos, and I felt like this game was in Nick Peternell's favor up until the turn when Morris Lent resolved the first Sidisi Brood Tyrant. He snuck it by Silumgar Sorcerer, and from there on, you felt like things had gotten away from Peternell.
I think that Nick may have misassessed just how much trouble he was in early on in the game. I think that he should have cast that Silumgar Sorcerer that you see cast now way earlier. The turn that he cast Master Ways, he had the opportunity to cast it at the end of the turn there before he played Master Ways and just hit. You saw he was just short of killing Chris on a couple turns, and now Chris is at 25 going down to 21, and it's just hard to play catch up from here.
Yeah, and you see Peternell's deck actually making a lot of powerful plays here. Second set of copy of Master Waves, making a ton of creatures, but I mean, in most situations, this would be really strong. This is a second Master Wave, so it's making 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 3/2s. This is 17 power worth of creatures, but you still feel that Nick's not going anywhere.
Chris slogged through the first Master Waves without killing it. He just had enough expendable resources that he could send the zombies in, and Nick was forced to block, and that was Chris's way of answering it. Didn't even need to kill it.
Yeah, it is a lot of threat here from Peternell, so we'll see Chris maybe have to go to the cards in his hand. Den Protector, the draw. Man, that Den Protector in this engine is just so powerful. You say, okay, maybe there's something Chris can't deal with here. Well, maybe not. Den Protector rebuys just about everything.
The awkward thing on the other side of the table is Chris went ahead and sacrificed his Sylvan Caryatid while he was jammed up on mana, got a Murderous Cut that he can't cast for the threat of Stratus Dancer, and now is really jammed up on mana. And he has to determine, am I going to play something out of my hand, or I'm going to play something via Whip of Erebos. And, for all the card advantage Chris has generated, if you're only casting 1 spell a turn, it doesn't matter. He's got 7 spells in his hand. He can't deploy them efficiently. It's really the only thing that keeping Nick in this game is Chris is just tied up.
Exploiting the Caryatid was not a free roll. There was some cost to getting rid of that land, and he's seeing some of that come back. Now, was he supposed to exploit something else? Maybe, maybe not. It is one of a weaker creature in this matchup. It doesn't block too much.
Or could have just kept using Sidisi, Undead Vizier, Brood Tyrant out of the graveyard. There was no rush for him to necessarily get the Murderous Cut unless he was planning on casting it right away. But because of the threat of Stratus Dancer, he's sort of forced to play this dance where he hopes that Nick unmorphs it and goes to the air at some point, or he finds some other spell that warrants a counter. But now there's 2 copies of Master Wave, so even if he's able to resolve the Murderous Cut, well, Nick doesn't lose the elementals. They're still available. Sidisi
Undead Vizier is whipped out of the graveyard. Both its enter the battlefield trigger and its attack trigger miss, so no more zombies for Chris Morris Lent. As he does attack, he will gain a lot of life here, however. As we go to blocks, Nick Peternell is not at a lot of life. He has to block everything. It's kind of interesting. In this whole situation, you feel like Nick has been the attacker this whole game, and then you look at the life total and you say, wait, Nick's at 3. When did this even happen?
Though, interesting enough, Nick's the one with the superior board presence at this point. And Chris is still jammed up in one spell a turn territory for the foreseeable future. One spell or activating Whip of Erebos. I think if Nick draws Thassa soon, he's still got a shot to steal this one. He's got a lot of mana. He's got some flyers. Thassa makes it very complicated for Chris to attack.
Yeah. There are no more Brood Tyrants in Morris Lent's graveyard. He has whipped them all back. But Peternell's at 1. He's got to be careful. And like, there are some difficulties, right? He doesn't have a removal spell for Sidisi. He's going to have to leave back a lot of blockers to deal with her. He can't safely attack with things that don't fly. And Morris Lent has a lot of life points.
Yeah, I'm not saying that Nick is favored here by any stretch, but he's still playing, I feel like. He's still got some draws.
Yeah, he's not ahead on the board, but you're right. If he finds a Sidisi, a Thassa, maybe he can start pushing, he can push some reasonable amount of damage through, but I think it has to be soon. As Chris starts to deploy more creatures from his hand, just the amount of life he gains each turn will just keep increasing, and eventually it starts to not matter.
Yeah.
But you're right, Peternell is still in this game, and for a while here, it seemed like that wasn't going to be the case. And if you're Chris Morris Lent, if he did get that Murderous Cut off Sidisi, at some point he can use it to attempt to, he can get it Stratus Danced and then Den Protect it. It is, what I do like about getting something like Murderous Cut is that it costs 1 on this board, and he's choked on mana, so just playing 2 spells in the same turn, regardless of what they're called, is what he needs to do.
Yep.
So just a full grip here. And now Chris, he's going to start grinding again. He needs some more action, so it'll be Courser of Kruvix.
He also just needs lands. I mean, that's the big thing. Chris needs to be able to activate Whip of Erebos and do something in the same turn.
Yeah. Den Protector on top. A good card here, the full stock graveyard, but that's not the problem. Chris already has a Den Protector in hand. He wants lands.
Yep.
There's a lot of them in the graveyard. A lot. You've seen twice where he has had whipped a Sidisi and missed twice. And I think like that last Sidisi hit 5 or maybe 6 lands. So things lining up in a less than ideal order for him.
Right, if Chris had just been making his land drops for the last couple turns, he would have been able to deploy stuff pretty efficiently, maybe overtake this game. But
interesting. So he goes for Sidisi Undead Vizier attacks and gains 4. Nick Peternell just chumps with an elemental. I almost expected him to go for 2 elementals to kill the Sidisi, but I guess he can't because he doesn't want Chris to whip it back.
Well, there's another Sidisi in the graveyard, so Chris already has access to that play if he wants it.
Yeah, someone expected Nick then, I guess, to try to kill it.
Yeah.
Kior's Follower, the draw. Here's a swing in the air for 4. It puts Chris down to 24, so they're treading water on life totals right now. Nick's dealing 4, but then Chris gains it all back. And it's going to be a 3rd Master Waves for Nick. If he had 1 more mana, he'd have played the Kior's Follower, but he's really committed to the Stratus Dancer. So he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 elementals. Now they're all 4/3s.
I mean, this is a real board. With Chris having the life total that he has, it's hard for Nick to be attacking for very productively here, especially with Nick at 1 and having to leave a lot back on defense. But
I mean, just of note, by the way, Chris Morris Lent in his main deck does not have any copies of Bioblight. It would be quite the draw against these 3/4/3 these Master of Waves. Post-board, he will have one, but in the main, he can't sweep up these Masters. Master's a wizard, right? So what a board here. I mean, Chris is doing what his deck's supposed to do. Be very good at playing fair Magic.
the problem is you're getting the sense that we're transitioning to this point where Nick is going to be able to chump block this DC and start attacking back with the elementals. He's going to start making some attacks on the ground, not just with his 2 flyers. And at that point, the 4 life that Chris is gaining from his attack with DC via Whip of Erebos is not going to compensate for the amount of damage coming on the way back. And the game's getting more and more to a stage where Thassa is a live draw to allow Nick to close this one out.
Well, when you look at Whip, I mean, the amount of life you gain off Whip is pretty linear. You have 1 creature, you gain 2. You have 2 creatures, you gain 4. You have 3 creatures, you gain 6. But if you look at things like Master Waves, that's not linear. Each Master Waves makes more tokens and then pumps all the tokens. So Nick's damage is increasing a lot more quickly than Chris's life gain is. I mean, you look at that last turn, in just elemental tokens, Nick now has 32 power worth of elemental tokens. Previously, he had 2 3/2s. Now he has 8 4/3s. He's going to whip back. It looks like a Satyr Wayfinder. He just wants to land that badly.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot to be gained by whipping back anything else, and he needs mana desperately.
Well, he could whip back a Sidisi and just tutor for a land, but that's probably, it's about the same thing.
I think you might be able to do a little bit better.
And if you want to talk about things, though, that he'd really love to mill and whip back, here's a one-of copy of Silumgar the Drifting Death. If he can get that in the graveyard and whip it back, it will kill everything. Master Waves will die, all the elementals will die. Stratus Dance, I mean, literal, just everything will die. It's a card Chris would have loved to have milled. He's going to draw it. It's actually kind of unfortunate for him.
So that means we're looking at a 2-turn window now.
Chris swings with the whipped back Satyr Wayfinder. Nick will block with an elemental. Chris gains 1, goes up to 25. But now he is on defense. Discards Death Mist Raptor to hand size. And play Lance back over to Peternell. Chris is at 26. And the question you have to ask here is, is this lethal? What are we looking at?
Well, Chris gains a lot of life via blocking. So he's up 10 life points just by blocking, and he can check 4 of the elementals. So put Chris at an effective 36.
Yep, 10 on the block, so he's at 36.
He can block 4 elementals.
All right, so there's 4 elementals getting through then. That's 16. 3 Master of Waves will go ahead and get through. That's 22. And if he has 4 in the air, that's going to be 26. As 3 more in the air, the Stratus Dancer is 29. It's not 36, so it's not lethal, but it's close.
And he can't also unmorph the Stratus Dancer because then all of a sudden the cut is enabled.
Nick, he's going to swing everything. He knows he's going to lose a lot for it. He's going to lose everything.
Yep.
I don't think it's lethal, though. I don't think he can do this. It was close, but it's not there.
I think, yeah, with the old lifelink rules where it was a trigger, I think
win.
we're looking at lethal attack. I think with the current rule set, no.
Yeah, he needs to leave the Master of Waves back. He can't actually, because once he loses all the Masters, he loses all the Elementals. It's a lot of damage and a really impressive attack from Nick, but it's not enough.
Well, he may not be able to block all the copies of Master Waves. It might be too much damage. Because the Masters are only worth 2 and these Elementals are 4.
Well, we had him at 29, so each time he blocks a Master instead of an Elemental, it's 2 more damage. So that's 6 more. It's 35, but he gains 10. It's still 36. Chris, if he blocks all the Master Waves, will go to 1.
Okay.
Actually go to 2 unless Nick flips up the Stratus Dancer.
And that's off the table again because of Murderous Cut.
So it's 2. We'll confirm this here. There's a lot of math going on here, but I do not believe Chris is dead.
Yeah.
It's real close. And if he's not dead and you're on Nick's side, you may be better served by just swinging all the elementals and flyers here. Or some number of elementals. Or even to a certain point, you can swing some flyers and rebuy it next turn. There's a lot of different options. I don't know if any of them get there. They're all really close.
And he doesn't even have to play around something like Collected Company for Thassa because Nick would have just tried to do that before combat and make some things unblockable. So I think that Chris is sort of just blocking what's on the board. I don't think there's any greater mystery here.
Well, while these guys are in game 1, an entire match has been completed on the other side of the bracket. We have Daniel Longoria, an Obzon aggro, a 2-1 winner over Nick Viral. Did not have Elspeth's, but his self-inflicted wounds were enough to take the match in 3. He will be playing the winner of this in our finals.
This has been a slugfest so far. Pretty impressive that Nick's been able to continue to play through this whip of Erebos. I mean, I don't know if Nick's going to be able to win this game, but it was looking like doom and gloom the minute that hit. And even with Chris at 26 in a stocked graveyard, part of this is because Chris has not been able to find his land drops, but Nick is playing on.
Yeah. And one thing I really have enjoyed about this whole tournament today is even in all of our matches, Standard right now has a ton of decisions. We look at a really strong player like Chris Morrisland, played in a Pro Tour recently, and you still say, boy, there's so many decisions he's making in this game. There's lots of ways to gain edges and to lose them as well.
Yep. Tons of decisions going on both sides of the table here.
The idea that one player has played this perfectly is probably off the table.
Yep.
Both playing it extremely well, though. So Chris determines he can block some Master Waves. He can block 2 of them, not 3. So now we count up. So 7 elemental tokens get through. That's 28. A Master Waves, That's 30. The Flyers, that's 34. Chris gains 10. He goes to 2.
And I think Nick may just be dead on the way back. He's at 1. Chris is going to be able to whip up something.
He just can turn his guy sideways.
Yep.
I know.
And now Strat's answer's done, so now the murderous cut can take care of the tokens if that matters. And
He just attacks.
Yep.
A slight miscalculation there on Nick's side.
He might have felt like I'm just dead and have to hope that Chris messes up the blocks or overblocks here or something, but
I mean,
I felt like
he's
Nick,
not going to mess it up. Like if it was an easy block to mess up, I do like that line. Force him to make the correct blocks. But the problem is, like, there's not really a way. Chris is going to, there's not a way for Chris to mess up the blocks.
I think Nick, in lieu of doing that, might have been able to say, I'll attack with the Flyers and the Elementals. I'm going to make some inroads on your board.
Yeah.
Some of your stuff's going to die. And if I draw Thassa, I might be able to push through the remaining Elementals. Because if he attacks with all the Elementals, I think the most likely scenario is he deals some damage. It's net positive damage. And if he draws Thassa, then he can dump his remaining mana into the Elementals, and maybe that's enough to kill over the course of 2 turns.
Yeah.
I don't think Nick necessarily had to go for it right in that spot.
I mean, yeah, maybe he needs to try to deal some damage to set up a shot. Now, I think he's right that his turns are getting he's getting less and less time. As soon as that Silumgar comes into play, game's over. Everything's dead. So there is a lot of pressure there. But as it turns out, Chris Morris Lent wins a slugfest of a game 1, and he is up right now. And kind of an issue, so Blue-Green Devotion, certainly not a deck we have been seeing a lot of this weekend, but a pretty interesting one. A lot of cards you don't normally see, I guess, in the deck.
Well, there's a throwback. I mean, you see the top of Nick's deck list here. It starts 4 Thassa, 4 Master Waves. And last year, you and I were doing a lot of coverage where that was one of the big 3, alongside blue-white control strategies and mono-black devotion. There's no doubt that those cards are extremely powerful Magic cards, but they are sort of predicated on the surrounding pieces. And for a while now, they haven't been very good. But possibly Shorecrasher Elemental, Silumgar Sorcerer, are reasonable enough additions to the deck where you can start unleashing the power of Thassa and Master Waves again.
All right. We right now, by the way, you're in currently game 1 completed of the semifinals here of the Star City Games Standard Open. Also, StarCityGames.com, one of the things we do here, well, selling cards as well as buying them. One thing we unveiled recently is the new StarCityGames.com buy list. So if you aren't familiar with what this is, Star City always keeps a maintained buy list of cards that they are currently purchasing and the prices they are purchasing for them. In the past, that was kind of a long affair. You'd inventory your collection, you'd figure out what you'd get for it, and you'd sell it. It has now been streamlined with the new StarCityGames.com buy list that we have here. It's a great-looking interface. Searching made easy. You can find the card you want to sell, complete with pictures of it. You can type in the name, get foil, non-foil, language. You get to know what you're going to sell, what the prices are, and get it all set up online before the purchase is even made. You can do this at one of our opens like we have this weekend or online. Find out all about this with StarCityGames.com/buy-list.
Yeah, sometimes the more specific things you were selling, maybe you had a card that was moderately played, or maybe you had a foil copy of the card. It can be a little complicated to see exactly what Star City was paying for it. Now you can use the cart to really narrow down your search and find exactly what you're trying to sell. You can also print out your buy list ahead of time, hand it over to a dealer at a Star City Games event, and have them just pay you right there rather than have to sit down at the table and wait for potentially a very long time for them to count out your order. Head over to StarCityGames.com/buy-list, check it out. You need to be registered with StarCityGames.com to access the buy list, but that's something you should just be doing anyway.
All right, sideboarding here. So we got to see that match play out quite a bit here. Let's go to Nick Peternell's sideboard. So he had a great aggressive start, but eventually Whip of Erebos was a big problem. Now looking at his sideboard, he doesn't really have too many answers to Whip of Erebos. He has 4 counter spells that could, in theory, take it down. Is that even the plan he wants to go on?
So when Nick played against Cedric Phillips in the quarterfinals, we focused on the top 3 cards of that list: Adisi's Faithful, Wall of Frost, and Case in the Ice. For this matchup, I think it's the bottom 3 we focus on. I think the 4 counter spells definitely come in here. The Sameful Stroke checks a lot of the most problematic cards. Sidisi, Whip of Erebos, those were really the 2 cards that beat Nick there in game number 1. I also think Aether Spouts is an okay card in this matchup. It's a fine answer to Sidisi. It's okay against Whip of Erebos, and I think it's more of a necessary evil than something that's proactively good like the counter spells, but I think Nick will bring it in.
Now, last card I want to look at here, this is Encase in Ice. There certainly are a lot of green creatures in Chris's deck. When you talk about RD6 cards he might want to bring in, especially in a matchup where he has to be the aggressor, it's Nick wants to be careful about how many threats he boards out. That said, in case Nice does take care of some of Chris's cards.
No, I agree. And I think it's just an issue then of how many reactive cards you want in the deck. I think he has to make a choice between Encased in Ice and Aether Spouts. To me, Aether Spouts seems slightly better. Encased in Ice might be the card that he wants, but I feel the 4 counter spells are a lot to come in. And then after that, it's some mixture of the Aether Spouts and Encased in Ice, and a lot of that is just going to be what is Nick's tolerance for bringing in all these reactive cards, because he still has to be the aggressive deck in the post-board games.
On Chris Moore's Lent side, he has a 15-card sideboard, 15 one-ups. A lot of things he could bring in. Start at the beginning. Some removal, Bioblight, that certainly looks good here. What else does he want to board in?
He doesn't have a lot of very impressive cards, in my opinion. I think the Ashiok is pretty good in this matchup. I think the Crux of Fate is solid. I think the Dragonlord Slumgar is a good threat. Nick doesn't have a lot of good ways to kill it. Potentially Duress if he's worried about the spells that Nick is sideboarding in, but I think this is going to be pretty light sideboarding.
Drown in Sorrow, is this a matchup for that kind of card?
I think Drown in Sorrow is fine. Good answer to Master Waves, good answer to a variety of the smaller cards as well.
All right, well, we're underway. Game 2, Nick Peternell versus Chris Moore's Lent for the second time. Nick will be on the play and starts off on a Temple. You do see in Chris's hand a sideboarded Ashiok in the opener. It does seem to be a pretty decent card, mainly because Nick's attacks don't deal too much damage. He would have trouble killing an Ashiok once it's on the board.
And Nick also has a variety of reasonable 2- and 3-mana creatures that, if Chris flips over early, are problematic for Nick to slog through.
Temple on Chris's side as well. Matchup expect Nick to be the aggressor, and aggressive he will be. It's going to be Kiora's follower on turn 2. See, he has boarded in Aether Spouts, one of them hiding out in his hand. And for Chris, it's 2-drop of his own. Has Rattleclaw Mystic and Satyr Wayfinder, seeing which one he wants to go for. If his turn 3 play is Ashiok, and he has the mana for it already, I think he'd go with Wayfinder, but his next line appears to come to play taps. He's going to play Mystic to guarantee that Ashiok.
Yeah, I think Wayfinder is slightly better if you're worried about Encased in Ice, and otherwise I'd rather have the Rattleclaw Mystic out there.
So we go back over to Nick Peternell, turn 3. He is the aggressor here. Looks like he does have a copy of Thassa. It's pretty much something he wants in every single opener. Every single matchup. Kiora's follower will offer a trade with Rattleclaw Mystic. Will Chris accept it?
It depends what his turn 3 looks like otherwise. If it's a land that comes into play tapped and a copy of Satyr Wayfinder, if he's worried about Thassa, maybe he just has to keep Rattleclaw Mystic in play.
He'll take 2, down to 18. I believe Nick has the Thassa as well. Now, the danger is that if he just taps out for Ashiok this turn and pluses it, and Nick has Short Crasher Elemental, he has an online Thassa and just kills the Ashiok.
Yeah.
And here's Thassa for Nick. So we go to Chris's turn 3. Does he hit an untapped land? He does not. He does hit a Thoughtseize. It looks like he has a pair of Thoughtseizes, so he could take a turn off from Ashiok just to rip apart Nick's hand.
And there's a variety of ways for Nick to get to triple blue, the additional triple blue he needs next turn to turn on Thassa. It is not just Short Crusher Elemental. That's the easiest way, obviously, but it is not just that card or bust.
Very interesting turn here for Nick. And rather than Ashiok, it has to decide between Ashioks and Thoughtseize. Or Thoughtseizes, rather. And maybe neither. Looks like he's going to go for Satyr Wayfinder.
I think this may be, he's looking
tough.
Satyr Wayfinder, find a land, play it, and Thoughtseize this turn.
Well, if you do that line, you'd want to start with Thoughtseize, right? In case you really need to Thoughtseize a second time.
I agree, yeah.
I mean, you're right. He probably all ends up in the same spot. He does go for Satyr Wayfinder, finds a Polluted Delta and a Swamp. Looks like Swamp will be the choice. And he'll play it. So because he found the untapped land, it looks like he gets to have his cake and eat it too. Thoughtseize and can have a second Thoughtseize if he needs. But in the event he doesn't find an untapped land, you may want to sequence the other way. Regardless, now he's going to get a look at Peternell's hand and see just what's going on. Thoughtseize will happen. And there was the Short Crasher Elemental. It's Short Crasher Elemental, Stratus Dancer, Thornwood Falls, and Aether Spouts. One of the difficulties with a card like Aether Spouts is once your opponent knows that it's there, it's very hard to get value off it.
It gets quite a bit worse.
Another Thoughtseize takes care of Stratus Dancer, leaves Nick with Aether Spouts land. Thassa's going to have to rebuild and do it quick because Chris has an Ashiok coming.
And Disdainful Stroke now the pickup here, but that is not helpful against Ashiok.
Plays Thornwood Falls. And Kiora's follower will swing. Swings past Seder Wayfinder. Chris may expect a counterspell of some sorts. Nick did not make the Kiora's follower unblockable. We'll see where he goes.
I mean, that's one of those spots where I think it's even just better to bluff having a counterspell than make unblockable.
Here's Rattleclaw Mystic in conjunction with 2 other lands. It looks like it's going to be the Nightmare Weaver. That cannot be Disdainful Stroked. It's only 3 mana. And that's going to resolve. This was the game plan that he set up for with all those Thought Seizes. And it mills 3 cards, but it's 3 lands.
Good news there for Nick. At this point, Nick can't really handle Chris just finding some small stuff to clog up the ground, develop his own board.
Look over at Chris's hand. It's got some big plays in it, but not too much else. It's got this Temple, an Opulent Palace, a Silumgar the Drifting Death, and Pharika God of Affliction, it looks like, or Sidisi, one of the 2, but not... It's not going to have any removal to break up Thassa if Nick gets enough devotion going.
And not a great hand against the Disdainful Stroke that Nick just packed up as well.
Well, Kiora's follower will swing in. See if it goes at Ashiok or at Chris. Maybe just go at Chris. Yeah, Chris down to 10. Nick scried to the bottom and drew a land, so not really where he wanted to be, but he'll pass back.
Yeah, I think that Nick can't really afford to devote resources trying to get Ashiok off the table because his clock is so slow right now. So I think the plan instead is just to keep attacking you, make things unblockable, and hopefully just ignore your Ashiok altogether.
Ashiok mills a Shorecrasher Elemental there. So now Chris does have the option of getting a creature. You see his draw there was the other Sidisi. This is Sidisi Undead Vizier. He's got Ashiok going. Got a good plan set up. It's going to be Sidisi trying to play Sidisi. I imagine you want to exploit away the Seder Wayfinder, but Peternell will have none of that. Disdainful Stroke takes care of the 4/6.
And this is a big, big turn here, potentially, if Shorecrasher Elemental is one of Nick's cards.
If he can turn on the Thassa this turn, then he's got a 2-turn clock going, and Chris has few answers to it. But he'll need it very close to now. Scries to the bottom and draws. Where did he get? Some number of blue mana symbols, perhaps. He's going to make the follower unblockable and attack. And does he have a foul play? He does not.
And this is the type of game where if Nick's Aether Spouts was instead in Casey Ice, it's a very different game. I mean, this Rattleclaw Mystic would have been pinned down that Chris has really been leaning on, and Aether Spouts does not seem to be something that Chris is particularly worried about. He is going to try to lock up this game.
Aether Spouts, to me, I don't just want to say I think it's a bad card, but I see this happen more often than I would like.
Sure. It's definitely poor against the discard.
Yeah. Shorecrasher Elemental put into play from Ashiok. That, combined with a pair of Sidisis and a Silumgar in Chris's hand, more or less means that if Nick wants to deal damage, Thassa's going to have to push all of it through. He's not going to get through really on the ground or in the air. The brick wall of Silumgar, the Drifting Death, now in play.
This is still a spot where Chris is very vulnerable. I mean, he can't answer the board at all right now. His hand's no help either.
Yeah, he would love something like Whip of Erebos or a kill spell. That would help him. But he swings in for 1. Nick's down to 20. Here's Thassa scrying again. Thassa has not helped him find much. He's been scrying to the bottom every turn and still not drawing anything of value.
Yep. I mean, I'm sure he's happy with the extra looks, but it has not yielded anything big just yet.
He got another Thassa this turn. Yeah, has not found the blue mana symbols he needs. Now has land, Thassa, Aether Spouts as his hand. It's a difficult spot to be, but because of Aether Spouts, he's not really dead yet. He actually, as much as he's been bricking on his draws, he still has plenty more draws to work with.
He's also at 20. I think in that turn, I would have preferred for Nick to go ahead and just attack Chris down to 6 and say go. Chris is cracking back for, I guess, a total of 3, 9, 10, 12 at the maximum, and I just don't think Nick can slow down.
Well, he wants to, I guess he wants to leave up Aether Spouts.
Exactly, that's the cost. But I think that you still have the ability to slow down the next turn if you do that, and you're cutting off your ability to potentially make Thassa and your next creature lethal next turn if you happen to draw a Shorecrasher Elemental. I just think that when you say go here, you are putting the ball in Chris's court to play around this Aether Spouts however he wants to. He gets to make an attack that's good enough to induce it without rooting him.
A swing with Shorecrasher Elemental and Silumgar is the play.
So I think that at this point, Nick does have to pull the trigger on the Aether Spouts.
So if he Aether Spouts here, because he's the owner of the Shore Crasher Elemental, I believe he can put it on top of his own deck. Which means he can then just choose to draw it this next turn, which is the draw he's been looking for anyway.
And it seems like Nick is just saying, okay, that's fine, and not using the Aether Spouts.
Yeah, I mean, but if that's that interaction, that's a great line for Nick. He gets to buy back his own creature. I mean, I believe that's the draw he's been looking for anyway. Now, to be fair, had it worked, Chris would be able to Ashiok it away.
Right. But I still feel like Nick at this point, I think Nick needs to plan on just drawing pretty close to perfectly, and he needs all of his mana available to do so because it all involves activating Thassa. I think he just needed to fire off that Aether Spouts last turn.
If not Aether Spouts now, then when?
Exactly.
This time, Nick scryed to the top. But just passes. Still no damage. And with no damage, I'm curious as to what card was kept on top.
Perhaps a counter spell?
It's good here, but not great. He needs damage. He really needs to get that Thassa to turn into a 5/5.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's been the goal for a lot of turns here, and he's still not working toward it.
Well, if he kept, imagine he kept Slumgar's Sorcerer on top of the deck, then maybe there's a route there for Nick to flash into play and then get Thassa going.
All right, here's the swing with all the creatures. Aether Spouts is going to put each attacking creature on top. The owner will put it on the top or bottom. And Nick has to choose where Shore Crasher goes. He is the owner of the card.
Mm-hmm. The distinction between controller and owner, some subtlety of the Magic templating universe.
Yeah, I believe actually the card Nick keeps on top is Collected Company. That's a pretty strong card here. It's definitely one he wants. Once again, if he had Aether Spouted the previous turn, he'd be able to company this turn. It's still a great Aether Spouts.
Yes, I think the whole hope here from Nick's side of the table was he would get Chris to kind of take a half measure to attack last turn and then get something slightly larger this turn, which is how that worked out.
Yeah, interesting enough, Chris puts all the creatures on top of his deck and then mills them off the Sidisi trigger. Mm-hmm. So that's why he's putting them all into his graveyard and not into his deck. Ashiok will go ahead and mill for 3. You saw Nick Peternell put the Shore Crasher on the bottom of the deck. Didn't really want it to get milled by Ashiok.
It hits for a lot. I mean, uncontested, that card's quite a bit of damage.
Of note, Chris did not get the zombie off the 2/2 because Sidisi still needs to be in play for you to actually get the zombie off the trigger. He does, however, make another Sidisi. That mills a creature, and that one will get him a zombie.
Yep.
A lot of intricate rules interactions going on right here.
But this is still dangerous territory for Chris. I mean, he's at 8. He has no removal, and he can't stop Thassa.
A scry to the bottom. Draws for the turn. Collected Company in hand for Peternell.
Yeah, he can just cast Collected Company here and hope that the devotion goes all the way up.
Here we go, Collected Company. This card has been so impressive in his 32 creature deck. And we look at it, we see Shore Crasher Elemental among one of them. This Thassa is turning into a 5/5.
Yep. And it does not, I mean, Chris is dead, not this turn, but next if he can't answer the board or the Thassa or play Whip of Erebus and gain a bunch of life.
It's going to be Silumgar Sorcerer and Shore Crasher Elemental. So a full 5 devotion added to the board.
Not a bad squad.
That card, this Collected Company, a card that has a lot of requirements on your deck if you want to play it, but it can be very powerful. This is the best Company deck I've seen in Standard.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to fulfill a devotion requirement, that's you can't do much better than that card. And if you're looking for an impact 3-mana creature, you can do a whole lot worse than Thassa.
Thassa makes herself unblockable, crashes through. Chris down to 3. With Peternell at 12. Chris does not have a lethal attack going on. We'll see, can Morris Lent survive? Does he find Whip of Erebos? Can he life gain through this? He's not going to be able to block.
I think even with Whip of Erebos, Chris is going to be hard-pressed to win this game.
Peternell has a replacement Thassa in hand. So even removing Thassa does nothing. If Chris can even remove Thassa, I'm not positive that he can get that card off the board.
He has Dragon Lord Silumgar, but that's not really an answer here with Nick having the backup.
Yeah, Ugin.
Yeah.
Out of the board.
If he brought in Ugin, which I would be surprised by.
Don't want to bring Ugin against a blue tempo deck. It's hard to do. Sidisi will attack. It'll mill 3 more. It mills another copy of Sidisi, makes a zombie, swings in. Nick can block and pump. He can block, untap a blue mana, make his 3/3 into a 2/4 and just say, okay. Can also just take it. Looks like that's what he did, went to 9.
Yep.
That plays better around Drown. I actually like that, and it plays a lot better around the Drown and Sour that's in Chris's deck. Had Nick made the play of making his Elemental a 2/4, he may have lost his Devotion.
And I also think that, if you're not sure what you should be doing right now, a good hand holder is just
just take it
and keep your Devotion count as high as possible.
And a morph from Chris. We know, looking at Den Protector, he takes a gander over Chris's graveyard, says, what's he going to get back? A lot of options. Don't know if we actually have the Murderous Cut, however. Bioblight is a removal spell.
Well, Bioblight doesn't work in this instance because Nick can go ahead and make Shore Crusher Elemental
Too big, yeah.
He can make it a 2/4,
yeah.
And that's Chris's only way to break up Devotion.
Back over to Peter now. He's going to, he has Encase and Ice in play. It looks like he just wants to put down a little extra, maybe make it unblockable, maybe put down some extra Devotion. Well, what is the way to play around Den Protector the best?
I don't mind playing the Encase and Ice on the Rattleclaw Mystic too, because at least you're sort of getting it up front. You make him use the mana on something.
So what he's going to do is he's going to use mana to make Thassa unblockable, Shore Crasher unblockable, Silumgar Sorcerer swings as well. So here's a lethal attack. Can Chris break it up?
I don't think he can get Nick below 5 Devotion, and I don't think he can prevent himself from taking 3 points of damage.
Den Protector is going to flip. It'll get a 1/1 counter. What is he going to buy back? Does he have a Murderous Cut to get? Does not look like it. He has Bioblight. He'll attempt. He can't even cast the Bioblight. Doesn't even have double black.
Yeah, there's nothing to be done there. Nick can go ahead and make his Shore Crusher Elemental a 2/4. Shrinking Thassa doesn't do anything. If he tries to kill the Slumgar Sorcerer, Nick still has 5 Devotion. There's no way for Bioblight to get him out of that spot.
All right, so Nick Peternell evens it up at 1 game apiece in what has been some of the more complicated games of Standard I've seen in a long time.
Well, that is a demonstration of the power of Thassa against a deck that's trying to block. Chris has some removal in his deck, but not a ton. He's got some Murderous Cuts, he's got a Bioblight, but he's not that good at containing the board. He's trying to just gum up the works. And game 1, he was able to do that pretty effectively, but Whip of Erebos is really what allowed him to win that game, just getting chunks of life. That game, he had the ground locked up, but he didn't gain life because he didn't find Whip of Erebos. He couldn't block because of Thassa, and eventually Chris succumbed, even though there was no shortage of action in Chris's hand. I mean, he had a pretty solid draw there, just couldn't contain Thassa.
Yeah, so if those of you joining us, we're in the semifinals of the Standard Open here at Star City Games Portland between Chris Morse-Lent and Nick Peternell. The winner will go on to the finals where their opponent is already waiting. It's going to be Daniel Longoria playing Obs on aggro. All these players, by virtue of top 8ing this, have qualified for the Invitational in Columbus here at the end of Season 2. So we look at our leaderboard, players working up toward the end of the season. One of the stories this weekend was Joe Lissette. Could he pull away on points in the weekend? As it turned out, not that strong of a performance for him in the Standard Open, but what did happen is Joe, making a top 8 performance in the Legacy IQ, has added points to his total. You see here that one playing out in front of us, making a deep run there. Going to close some of the distance between him and Kevin Jones, him and Ross Merriam. The question is going to be how much.
Exactly. He gets some participation points for his performance yesterday. He was 3-4 and dropped from the tournament, so no additional points based on finish there, but about 20 feet in front of us right now, Joe Lissette is competing in the top 4 of the Legacy IQ, so an opportunity to make up some of that ground that he failed to do yesterday.
So congratulations to him. We'll see how much when the weekend is over. Then the ball will be back 2 weeks later. Once you go back east, the ball will be in the court of Kevin and Ross.
And I asked Joe, are you going to Dallas? Are you going to Worcester? And he sort of gave me a begrudging yes. So it sounds like he is trying to lock this up. This weekend did not go well in Standard, but right now playing Miracles and Legacy, top 4 of the IQ right now.
Hard to keep him down with that deck. We bring you back to our match, though. Players re-sideboarding for Game 3. You have to think that both these players are somewhat learning this matchup as they go. It certainly is not something you practice against.
No, and I think for Nick, Aether Spouts ended up being fine there, but when Chris has Thoughtseizes to check out your hand, that reduces a lot of the impact. Chris also has the option of sideboarding into his Stratus Dancer if he wants to. That's a pretty good guard against Aether Spouts as well. So Nick can only afford to be so reactive. I think Encase of Ice may be better in this matchup, as there's Rattleclaw and Mystic, there's DC, there's, a couple other green creatures for him to check with it.
I didn't mind Aether Spouts there, actually. There are a couple of things going on that I thought were pretty interesting. I mean, Chris knew about it, but because his deck is so creature heavy, eventually at one point, Chris just had to swing into Aether Spouts, even though he knew it was there.
It takes a long time for Chris's deck to really be able to attack. And Aether Spouts can kind of work itself, not quite Time Walk, but it is an awkward card for Chris to play around. And when his clock is so slow, it can take a very long time for Chris to play around that and still put together lethal.
All right, we're underway, game 3. This time, Chris Morris Lent on the play. He was been on the draw for the first 2 games. Players trade tap lands to start things out. As we go back over, Chris passes the turn. He has boarded in his Reclamation Sage. That's something which likely wasn't there in the first spot. It does get rid of Hypnotic Siren and now Encase of Ice. As you see Kiyora's Follower for Peternell, that's going to be the first creature of the game. And for Chris, it's going to be the grind starting out. Here's Courser of Krufix on turn 3.
Good start for Chris so far. But now an opportunity here for Nick potentially to get an uncontested Thoughts into play. And as we saw before, Chris really struggles once that card enters the battlefield.
Yeah, he doesn't have a way to remove it. He doesn't have a reasonable way of removing it outside of Thoughtseize effects. It is, as we've said before, the most important card in Nick's deck.
In this matchup, yes. In some of the more aggressive matchups, maybe it's Master Ways, but here it is all about Thassa. And it wasn't like Chris's draw was bad last game or that he lacked things to do. He just couldn't block.
One thing that stuck out to me last game is I expected Ashiok to be a little more effective out of Chris's deck. He had many uncontested turns of Ashiok. Nick just ignored it, and it never seemed to come back to get him.
Well, that was another issue with Thassa. If Chris isn't blocking, all he can do is attack with the things he's generating off of Ashiok. And when Nick's sitting there, he's sitting on Aether Spouts the whole time, then it's hard for Chris to even do that.
Go back over to Nick. He's going to need to put some pressure on the board. If they both just take turns playing lands, that will favor Chris's deck. See, he has a full grip here. See where he wants to go. Thornwood Falls, make him gain life. I do believe he has a copy of Thassa in hand. And he's going to pass the turn.
Looks like he's committed to sitting on Silumgar Sorcerer again.
At what cost? At what point, if he does have a card, yeah, he has Sorcerer at the front of his hand, he does have a Thassa. How many turns can he do this, I guess? Second Courser for Chris. Is that worth getting rid of with the Sorcerer? 2 life gainer turns, actually pretty relevant against Nick.
Yeah, I think that he's got to cast something here.
Yeah. And he will. He'll exploit away the Kiyora's Follower and counter the second Courser.
Yep. I mean, the second Courser is not something you really want to fight over because they're on such diminishing returns, but I don't think if Nick's going to hold up 3 mana in lieu of playing Thassa, he's got to cast that on the first target because he can't keep repeating that turn.
An interesting line here so Chris plays the Temple, gains a life, does scry the Hornet Queen to the bottom. Not going to want that one. Gets Thoughtseize on top.
And now with Thoughtseize coming, Nick has to cast the Thassa.
He can't let Thassa get Thoughtseized. Thassa's the whole show.
That's the deck.
You need one. And all right, so he swings in for 2. Now we're back over to Nick. He's at 19, draws land. Knows Thoughtseize is coming. Now, one thing that is problematic, though, if he goes for the Thassa here, there's a window where Chris gets to have Whip of Erebos in return for Nick's Thassa. As we saw before, Whip of Erebos was really difficult for Nick to deal with.
With that said, I don't think Nick has a choice.
No, he still has to do it. You're right. Maybe not. No, he's going to, in the face of Thoughtseize, hang on to Thassa.
I mean, maybe he has a second. If he has a second Thassa in hand, I suppose this is fine, but.
He's got a plan. I'm interested to see where Nick's going with this.
I want to see this shake out too, because that seems like a very good window to stick Thassa.
Well, it's not the kind of play that you just forget to make. It's the kind of play where you know what you're doing. It's like, no. Thassa's not what's important right here.
Yep.
As it turns out, Chris makes the whip anyway, and Nick will go ahead and encase and ice away the Courser and untap for his turn. Chris valuing that whip so highly right now.
And unfortunate for him, just the worst possible timing there to pick up Disdainful Stroke. Last turn was a great window for him to have it if he had it.
Well, not too bad, because Chris does have a Sidisi Undead Vizier in hand, so he can at least play Thassa this turn and then Disdainful Stroke the Sidisi. In case Nice is getting Sidisi a great thing to exploit. It will only keep Chris off it for so long. He has Whip, but it could still be very good. Sorcerer will hit Chris down to 14. He'll play Thassa, leave up 2, and say go. Remaining hand, a Disdainful Stroke, a dual land, 1 more card.
The problem is with Chris drawing Thoughtseize, you may see a turn here of, say, Thoughtseize plus Reclamation Sage on Encase and Ice rather than play something into the Disdainful Stroke.
And he does want to see what's going on. It's going to be Thoughtseize. He'll go down to 12 for it. Yeah. Silumgar Sorcerer in hand. He can't get rid of that one. So it is Disdainful Stroke, Sorcerer, Yavimaya Coast.
These cards are pretty close in value right now. I would imagine you want to get rid of the Sorcerer if no other reason than it's just double blue.
Yeah, that's numbers 4 and 5.
Yeah.
If he doesn't have a kill spell, which he does, he has Crux of Fate. Maybe, but yeah, he'll take Sorcerer regardless.
Crux of Fate is not a card that I think Chris can afford to really lean on that heavily in the face of Thassa. I mean, Nick on an empty board here, Thassa against with Veribos. I think Nick might have an edge this early on. Chris has no haymakers to really get out of his graveyard.
And Reclamation Sage will take care of the Encase and Ice as we pass back to Peternell. He'll scry off Thassa. He's going to need more help, though. That Whip of Erebos, the passive life gain off it, as we've seen in the past, has just been very tough for Peternell's deck to deal with.
Yeah.
He almost went over at game 1 by just playing lots of copies of Master of Waves. But now that Chris has Crux of Fate in his hand, I just don't see that working either. Here's Sorcerer. It swings for 2. Morris Lent is down to 10. And Kiora's Follower. That was the draw for Nick. That's what he's got. We pass back.
I mean, Nick is pretty close. He's face up on his hand right now. Chris knows that he's playing against the Disdainful Stroke and nothing else.
Chris doesn't have land 5, however. Draws Downfall. Has Sidisi, Downfall, Crux of Fate, and Thoughtseize. So he'll Thoughtseize. That's the Disdainful Stroke. Chris pretty confident. He's going low on life points here, really knowing that Whip of Erebos is going to help him out. So Thoughtseize away the last card from Nick. It's going to Downfall away the Silumgar Sorcerer. Imagine he's just going to swing one, if not both creatures. Yeah, it's both. He wants the life points. Doesn't mind trading them.
Yeah, if Nick wants to trade here, that's one more blue mana symbol he's down, and then that suddenly means that Shore Crasher Elemental does not turn Thassa on.
And 4 life gain from Chris Morrisland. He's up to 12. We're back to Nick. He's going to need some draws, but he does have Scries. Scries to the bottom, swings for 2, puts Morrisland down to 10.
The big draws right now, I think a Shore Crasher Elemental and Collected Company could be huge.
Yeah, Collected Company has just been unreal every time we've seen him cast it. And Chris, he is fading some draw. Nick's fading some draw steps here. We do see the draw was, he drew Satyr Wayfinder, but then the top card's still not a free land. It's the DC.
Yeah, Chris's hand is a little jammed up right now.
But Satyr Wayfinder will fix that. It puts a Sidisi in the yard, even if it doesn't find a land, which it does, so that Chris can start whipping things back. Mills those ones. Top card of the deck is another Courser. But Chris does have land 5 now, thanks to Satyr Wayfinder. He'll play it. It's Temple of Malady. Gains 1. Does he want the Courser on top? We will see. And for Chris, the story, this seems to go back to the story of game 1. Whip of Erebos, giving all his creatures lifelink, has just eclipsed what Nick's deck's been able to do.
Yeah, 4 mana, even setting aside getting stuff out of the graveyard, 4 mana give your team lifelink with Nick not contesting the board and trying to race it with damage in small chunks. It's been very hard for Nick to play through this card.
He swings. Could have no end step Collected Company or anything from Nick. Looks like his hand is Island. He's scrying to the bottom again and draws. One thing is that because of the difference in quality of cards in Nick's deck, he is scrying every turn, but when you think about his deck, there are so many blanks. It's not uncommon in these situations. We've seen him had Thassa, and he just scries a blank to the bottom and draws a blank.
Right.
And it's been repeatedly happening here.
At this point, it feels like his deck is basically just Shore Crasher Elemental because of Thassa, Collected Company for some huge reward, and everything else is just not going to be good enough.
Goes ahead and plays a Morph face down. That's a copy of Stratus Dancer. Chris's draw for the turn is Sidisi, the 4 mana one. Now has them both in hand. And a Sidisi, other Sidisi, Crux of Fate.
Now, a saving grace here for Nick having a Stratus Dancer down is it does make it a lot more complicated for Chris to get back Sidisi, tutor for Murderous Cut, and blow things up that way.
Yeah, one thing we've seen, though, a good patience on Morris Lent's side is that when his opponent has had mana up, he's whipped things instead of casting things, and he's not deviating from that game plan right now.
Right.
Whipping the Undead Vizier into play, sacking a Wayfinder. Great plays.
The thing is, none of his creatures are spectacular here, and none of the spells are really tenable because of the Stratus Dancer he can assume is down. I suppose he can go get Slumgar, Dragon Lord Slumgar. That's not bad here if you take the Thassa. Nick's not working with a whole bunch else.
See him contemplating between Murderous Cut and Drown in Sorrow as to what he wants to find. He probably has a good suspicion that there's more of a Stratus Dancer, so regardless of what he gets, it's not going to do too much. But at some point, he has to just work his way through Stratus Dancer. And they're going to swing. This is most importantly, it's going to gain him 8 life, putting him up to 22. One card in Nick's hand. Yeah, he'll just take it all.
Yep.
And he goes down to 4.
He can't block. He's got to try to give himself the best shot to get to 5 Devotion.
Blocking not really what his deck does in this situation, or in any situation for that matter. And that Crux of Fate in Chris's hand should be the insurance policy that even if Nick gets to enough Devotion, it's not going to matter. Here's the turn for Nick. 4 life. Scries to the bottom yet again. Draws. What can he hit? One of the cards in his hand is an island. He'll play that. And it looks like he's going to Collected Company.
Okay.
It's a great draw.
I mean, it's got to be this.
Yeah. All right, here's 6 cards. And this card, is, we said before, has been fantastic every time. Always finds 2 creatures. I mean, mathematically, this thing's just almost always going to hit 2 creatures.
Yeah, I think you mentioned earlier you think 27 is about the...
It's about where I start liking the card, which is a really high number, to be fair, because your deck has to play lands and has to play 4 Collected Companies. So at that point, you're kind of just... If you go back to like when Lead the Stampede was good in Standard, how you see these decks which were all creatures and 3 Lead the Stampedes. And this card's not too far off that.
And to that point, Nick's deck list here is 24 lands, 4 Collected Companies, and 32 creatures.
I love it, especially in some of the creatures like Sorcerer double as pseudo spells. He's a counter spell. That's great. So Collected Company finds 5 mana worth of blue creatures again. We have Shorecrasher, Elemental, and Silumgar Sorcerer. And he's going to crash in. Thassa's online. Kiyora's Follower's online. 9 damage in. Chris down to 13. And he can turn around real fast here and try to deal damage. Chris is going to attempt to Murderous Cut. As we know, Nick has Stratus Dancer. Can't imagine that's going to work. But he's going to make Chris delve away first.
I imagine this is doing this with the intent of casting Crux of Fate next turn.
And there's no good way for Nick to get around that. Either the Crux is resolving.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I guess there's a question of, is he better served leaving up 3 mana for Shorecrasher Elemental? But I feel like he's got to unmorph here.
So Nick will be able to he'll just go ahead and Stratus Dance away the Murderous Cut. Leaves up 1 blue mana for Shorecrasher, but that won't help against Crux of Fate. And Murderous Cut the top card of Morris Lent's deck as well. Here's a land. He'll go to 14. Peternell still at 4. Here's a swing for 4. Peternell's going to probably block all of this. See what he wants to do. Shorecrasher in front of the 2/1. Now it looks like I should take 2 off Courser. That's some free damage, but maybe one that he has to do.
Yep. I think he needs to keep Chris honest to at least fire off the Crux of Fate here.
Yeah, if he blocks a Sorcerer, maybe Chris doesn't Crux of Fate.
Maybe just cast some random creatures or so forth.
Yeah. Nick down to 2. Chris gains the 4 life, and now Crux of Fate sweeps up everything but the Thassa.
Now, I think there's still hope here with Collected Company. Nick is not necessarily out of this game.
Yeah, he'll have to use it defensively in some ways because Chris is going to draw Murderous Cut and whip back a card. It's Collected Company that he needs. And it's not going to work, so there you have it. Chris Morris Lent takes Game 3 in a slugfest over Nick Peternell and moves on to the finals.
That was a great match there, and Nick's deck, very, very cool. Potentially a return of Master Waves and Thassa. I think in Game 3 there, he's better served just getting Thassa into play as soon as possible. I think the longer the game goes on, the more of an edge Chris has. I know there's some risk there with tapping out, but I think there was some earlier turns there where Nick might have been able to punish Chris a little bit more.